Shalom, everyone. It's been a good night so far, so let's kind of keep it rolling. Um, Next week, I've been doing the Parshas all along, but next week I want to do Hanukkah, because I think a lot of people think that this whole celebration is about the menorah, and actually, that's the least part of it. That's just a miracle that occurred, and that's not what the story of Hanukkah is about. And so I've been thinking about it and I've been researching it, and I'd like to teach on Hanukkah next week. In order to do that, I decided that I would try to combine the next week's Parsha, which is Maketz, and this week's Parsha, Vayeshev. And the thing I found in common was dreams. And so tonight I just want to focus on dreams. I don't know if you're interested in books. I have a book. It's by Avraham Trugman. It's very simple. I mean, simple. As you can see, I only put a few highlights in there. But it's a book called The Mystical Meaning of Dreams. And this is from an Orthodox Jew. And the information in it is amazing. He takes you through the concept of why dreams are important and why dreams today are not anything like dreams of yesterday. Nothing like what happened in the days of the prophets. Our dreams just don't hold the same water. But I want to talk about that. So I want you to turn in the Tanakh, the Torah, and I want you to go to chapter 37. And we're going to do the first few verses of 37, and we're going to do the first few verses of Maketz, because that's where the two dreams that I'm going to talk about come from. And I want to talk about the difference between the two sets of dreams as much as anything else. And so, excuse me. So as we go through, I want to try to give you some basics in understanding dreams. I'm not going to go as deep as I could and probably should, but I just want to start simple. So if we go to chapter 37 and we look at verse 1, it begins by saying, Jacob settled in the land of his father, and his father's sojourns in the land of Canaan. These are the chronicles of Jacob. Joseph at the age of 17. Chronicles, a chronology, a list of. There's only one child listed. When we went through Abraham had a chronology. He had one child. That was Isaac. And now here again, we're going back and we're rerunning that same movie. But anyway, as you go through, you notice the next line. Joseph, at the age of 17 years, was a shepherd. Joseph was a shepherd with his brothers by the flock, but he was a youth with the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives, and Joseph would bring evil reports about them to their father. Now, Israel loved Joseph more than all of his sons since he was a child of his old age. This is a phrase that's going to change as we go through it, because we don't know what it really means. He goes on to say, and he made him a fine woolen tunic, and his brothers saw it, and it was he who their father loved most of all the brothers. And so they hated him. And again, we're going to learn a difference between hate in the Jewish term and hate as we understand it. And he goes on to say, and they could not speak to him peacefully. Joseph dreamt a dream. This is where we went, which he told his brothers, and they hated him. They hated him even more. Now he said to them, hear, if you please, this dream which I have dreamed. Behold, we were binding sheaves in the middle of a field, when, behold, my sheaf rose, and all the others remained standing. Then behold, your sheaves gathered around, and they bowed down to my sheaf. His brothers said to him, would you then reign over us? Would you then dominate us? And they hated him even the more, because of all the dreams. And he dreamt another dream, and he related it to his brothers, and he said, look, I dreamt another dream. Behold, the sun, the moon, and the 11 stars bowing down to me. And he related it to his father and to his brothers. And his father scolded him and said to him, what is this dream that you have dreamed? Are we to come and your mother and your brothers to bow down to you to the ground? So his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in his mind. Okay, we have two dreams that we're going to talk about, but we're going to put some context around it, I think. And by that, I mean, we're going to talk about the family. Please understand, from all of the sages, all of the boys, all of them were righteous. All of them would have been considered tzaddiks of their day. But even so, even among tzaddiks, there's oftentimes differences. And sometimes the differences boil over into what people think of or call hate. And that's where we're going to go. I also want you to understand that what's happening in this particular character with Joseph is the same structural problem that happened in the second temple period. In the first temple period, we understand that idolatry dominated, and that was the reason for the temple to fall. Now, in the second temple, it wasn't about idolatry. In fact, more people were righteous than ever before. But the problem was hate. That was the problem. And so I want to a little bit grasp that and bring it into the story so that we get a better understanding of why the second temple was destroyed and why Rome ended up being in charge. Now, at this particular point in time, Joseph was seen by his brothers as the dreg of dregs. He was of no good to them. He was a righteous boy, and the word boy applied. In other words, he did not fit in with what they were thinking. But you can see that today in all of the different religions, how there are so many ways in which we look at the same subject, look at the different ideas. Even in Judaism, there's variance and degrees of righteousness based upon their understanding of the text. So when Joseph is beginning to tell his dreams, the people there begin to look at him differently. Now, the brothers themselves, according to one of the midrashic readings I was going through, the brothers said, you know, he doesn't belong in this family. You know, when Abraham had two sons, he had to send one of his sons away. And when Isaac had two sons, remember, one of those sons had to go away. It must be the same thing here. We're all in agreement, but Joseph is not. He needs to go away. And so they began to plot against him. Now it says that he came out and worked with them with the sheep, but every time he was working with them with the sheep, he would return home and he would have evil reports to give to them, which was not a good thing. Now he saw in his righteousness that he should be the one that tells his father about all of the evil that they're doing. But the problem is if you go to Hafetz Haim, is the understanding of our speech, how we speak and how we talk to one another. And what we say and how we say it makes a huge difference. And the emphasis we put into our voices makes a huge difference. Well, Joseph was putting all of that emphasis in there. There were some lines, according to the Midrash that I was reading, it says that Joseph looked at them, and one of the things that he noticed from them, I think it came from Rashi, if I go correctly from this, he said that the boys were eating the flesh of animals. He said that the boys were looking on the slave girls. He said the boys were doing all kinds of sexual kinds of things, deviant kinds of things. And there just wasn't going to be any peace because of it. Well, obviously the boys didn't take that very well. So we continue the story. Now, in our story, we have to understand he is a son of the old age. And I want to give you a new understanding of what that phrase could possibly mean. You see, when Joseph was born, he was born to Jacob at 91. Now, we normally don't think about it, but understand there were 7 years in which all of these boys were really born. So there were multiple births going on in every year. Naphtali and Zebulun were only 9 months older than he was. So it's not a question of son of the old age. They were all sons of a man who was in his older age. It was not something where it was one. But the expression is ben zakunva. It means, in essence, that this was a custom of one of the sons of a father always being kept at home to help the father in his old age. He was the one who helped him limp to wherever he was wanting to go, who would go get the extra food for him or whatever it was that he needed. He was the gopher of the tent. That's what he was. That was why he was the son of the old age. Benjamin was even younger, but Benjamin was not old enough, according to many of the texts, to be able to do all of these things. And so Joseph at 17 was old enough to support his father as his father needed help walking. He was old enough to do all of the activities around the camp. So Joseph was that right age, but he was called the son of his old age. Now, if we go back to the text, I want you to look at a particular word in this particular case, and the word that I want you to look at is peace. And now I've lost it. Well, that took care of that. The word peace in the Hebrew text, on the Hebrew side, is not the same, or is not correct, I guess is what I'm looking at. You see, the word shalom, which is the word for peace, is spelled shin, lamed, yud, or vav, and mem. But in the text, peace is misspelled, telling us a little bit about the kind of peace that was in the house. Imagine everyone in the house is righteous, and yet there was no peace. There was no peace. Things were not going in the right direction. Now, as we're looking at this, Joseph is going to have the advantage over his brothers. Just like a minister or a rabbi has advantage over his congregation. You see, I was a school teacher, a principal for 43 years. I didn't have time to study, not like I wanted to. His brothers spent more time in the fields. Certainly they could meditate, certainly they could reflect, but who was at the tent with the teacher? Day after day after day after day. It was Joseph. Joseph and Jacob had created a language between themselves that was far different than the language for the others. In fact, Jacob was so appreciative of that language. Remember what he did? He gave him a coat of many colors, as we say it, a tunic, something special, a reward for doing what he was doing. And Jacob and Joseph had a bond that was very, very different. We know that all of the Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, all of them were prophets. And we'll see the prophecy at the end in chapter 48 and 49 and 50. But at this particular point in time, I want us to understand the fact that a prophet is one who studies, who meditates, and who prays. And it's for long periods of time. At school, I didn't have long periods of time. In fact, there were many days that I ate lunch when a kid handed me an apple and I could stand in the line and keep track of what's going on and go outside on recess and come back in. I was one of those guys that if I had to stay in my office, I would have gone crazy. Plus the fact I would have had 55 students lined up at my door every hour on the hour being sent to me. This way I knew them, they knew me. Life was good. Discipline was limited. Well, Joseph and Jacob had this relationship that was far superior. But in having that relationship, a prophet has multiple ways of receiving a prophetic message. The message that he received came twice, and it was something that he needed to say to somebody. And so he said it to his brothers, which made them all the more angry with him, because it sounded like what he was doing was putting them down and building himself up. And so there became a hatred, but not in the way that we would think of. Yes, they probably wanted to kill him. I remember there were days when I wanted to kill my sister. I did. She's still alive, but life is still going on. But at the same point in time, we do have those times when we don't like each other, for lack of a better term. Fortunately, my wife likes me, so therefore I don't have to spend too many days thinking about all of the hate that could possibly be coming. Right. But anyway, so one of the parts of a prophet are dreams. But understand that what I'm talking about came when there was no television. There was no technology. There was none of those things. In fact, by the middle of the Second Temple period, there were no longer prophets. They were gone. Malachi, Ezra, those were the last of the prophets. That seems rather strange. We think prophets continue on. In fact, I was in church when one gal came up to me and asked me, she says, you know, I'm a prophetess. Don't you know that? And I said, you are? And she said, yeah. Do you want to know how I know? And I said, well, not really. But I said, are you willing to take the test of a prophet? And she said, well, what's that? And I says, well, if you tell us a prophetic message and you're wrong, they poured lead down your throat. And that's how they took care of it. And she said, oh, no, my goodness, I wouldn't want to do that. And I said, well, understand that there was a different level of prophecy back then than there is today. And I want you to hear that. So anyway, she never asked me again to tell me any of her prophetic messages, but the understanding was she now understood what I knew already. Prophecy was an ancient practice. Dreaming was one of the ways that it happened, through dreams. Joseph will have two dreams in our message today. Those two dreams become very, very significant as we go through this whole thing. As we're looking at it, obviously Joseph is oblivious to other people. He is of no earthly good at the point in time in which these things are happening. He's insensitive to his audience. But at the same point in time, he wanted to get his message out and he wanted it to be as clean as possible. And so he began his message very simply. Sheaves, out in the field, bundling sheaves. All of our sheaves stood up, but yours moved towards mine and bent over, bowed to me. That was it. Very simple. Everybody there understood the message that there would come some point in time. But remember, how did the brothers recognize? You mean we're going to bow down to you? I can imagine an caustic conversation going back and forth between the two. But you see, the same kind of conversation could go on between two rabbis today. And both could be right. See, we live in this world where we think there's only one right answer. And the answer is no, there's not. If God can have 70 names, we can have 70 ways of understanding that same phrase. And all of them could be right on some level. And so he gave his message. His message was loud and clear. They heard it. They understood it. They didn't like it. But the message was clear. Then he had another message. And this time, not only did the 11 bow, now they were called stars, signs of the zodiac, mazel. And the sun and the moon also bowed. Now everybody says, well, that can't possibly be because the moon is his mother Rachel and Rachel was dead. But the rabbis understood that he was talking about Bilhah, Rachel's concubine. They all bowed down to him. And you notice Dad kind of interrupts it. He's not totally critical, but he puts it in his memory and holds it. That was his dreams. In our generation, we're called the Yered Toledot, the descending of generations. We think we're getting smarter, when in actuality, We gain nothing over the original generations. Those generations back then had a great deal of intelligence that we couldn't possibly understand. We just have it in a different form. You see, all the way through, every generation has to have things that will cause them to either go towards good or go towards evil. We all have to have choice. Choice in what we listen to, choice in what we watch, choice in who we talk to, choices in everything. And in the days in which Moses lived, and remember all the miracles that occurred when Moses was around aren't occurring today. We don't have that massive, I haven't seen a water split in a long time. In fact, I don't think I've ever seen the water split. So there's a difference in the way God is approaching us and the way he's teaching us. And so when we begin to look at ourselves, we're looking at something that's quite different. Now, today I have a nice library. I have my Talmud, I have all of the Zohar, I have all of the different books. And by the way, I didn't bother to tell you, the 19th of this month is a very special day. The 19th of this month is the day that a man named Shneur Zalman was released from prison. Shneur Zalman is the leader or the founder of what we would call Chabad. He had been spending, well, in his particular place, he was in Russia. That's where he lived. In fact, he moved his family to Russia and told others to follow him. And so they moved to Russia, and they're there. The other rabbis didn't like what he was teaching. You see, he was teaching that we should all be available to learn all of the Torah, not just the oral, or not just the written, and not just the plain text. He wanted us to learn everything we wanted to learn. Quite a renovator, because in those days, everybody who was scholarly, they were the elite, and they kept it among themselves. But he said that's not the way it should be. We should be spreading it to everyone. And I think it's because of Shneur Zalman that I was able to be able to learn some of the Zohar, to learn the Kabbalistic material. Because I know that there are still rabbis that are teaching that Gentiles should never learn any of this. That's just for Jews. But I understand in my heart that God has opened the Bible to us. He opened it to me quite differently after 50 some years of age, when he began to teach me that the Old Testament was more relevant than the New. And that's where I spent my time. And I began to gain so much ground. And then I was fortunate, I got to retire. And now I get more time to study, more time to babble on like I'm doing right now. That's the important thing. Now, in our story then, we now go to a second story, and I want you to turn over to chapter 40, or 41, I think it is. Yeah, 41. And we're now talking about maquettes. We're now moving into the second Torah, it is chapter 40. Chapter 40, verse 1. Or 41, 1. It begins, it happened. Hopefully you're with me. So it happened at the end of 2 years to the day Pharaoh was dreaming. So what have I skipped? I've skipped the time in which Joseph was taken prisoner, thrown into a pit, left the pit, now has been hauled by the Midianites down, became a servant of Potiphar. Potiphar's wife tried to seduce him. After that whole seduction situation, he was thrown into prison. He saw 2 more dreams there. And in doing those 2 dreams, one of the things that happened was one of the characters died, one of the characters was liberated, and he was foolish enough to ask him, please remember me when you get out to the Pharaoh. And he spent another 2 years there. So our story goes on. Pharaoh was dreaming that, behold, he was standing over the river being the Nile. And behold, out of the river there emerged 7 cows of beautiful appearance, robust flesh, and they were grazing in the marshlands. Then behold, 7 other cows emerged after them out of the river, of ugly appearance and gaunt flesh, and they stood next to the cows on the bank of the river. The cows of ugly appearance and the gaunt flesh ate the 7 cows that were beautiful. Pharaoh awakens from his dream. Pharaoh had a second dream. And behold, 7 ears of grain were sprouting on a single stalk, healthy and good. And behold, 7 ears, thin and scorched by the east wind, were growing after them. Then the 7 thin ears swallowed up the 7 healthy ears, and Pharaoh awoke, and behold, it had been a dream. Now, I want to tell you that this dream that we're looking at now is a Gentile dream. And the dream that we looked at before was a Jewish dream. And I come by that very easily. Pharaoh's a Gentile. Pharaoh's a Gentile. And so his dreams are aimed at the Gentiles. Joseph's dreams was aimed at his brothers who were Jews. He's speaking to his own kind. But I also want to introduce the fact that dreams that happened back then still have relevance today and are still pertinent today. In fact, the rabbis would tell you that the Jews should continue to read the dreams and continue to grow from those dreams. Well, how do you grow from a dream that was given to 11 brothers who are no longer around, whose families are no longer around? And we can't tell where many of them are because they're so mixed up with everybody else. But look at what happens. In the dreams of Pharaoh, Pharaoh the Gentile, it was not uncommon for the kings to receive dreams back in those days. Daniel, remember, goes and interprets the dreams of Nebuchadnezzar. Dreams were something that the prophets were able to understand. Joseph had a special understanding because he was able to take the dreams and he could put it into time and space. So here, let's go back to Pharaoh's dreams first, and then we'll go back to the other. Notice what he's dreaming about. The first thing he dreams about are cows. The second thing he dreams about are corn. They both have one thing in common. They're low-level things. And if you look at it closely, Pharaoh has nothing to do with the corn that's healthy, nor the corn that's weak. He has nothing to do with the healthy cows or the sick cows. You see, Pharaoh, like most Gentiles,
Your microphone just went off, so I don't know what's plugged or unplugged. You're not on mute. I think Joe did it.
It's an improvement. You know, I like this class a lot more when Steve's on mute.
I tell you, Joe.
That is so wrong, Joe. Joe, you're going to have extra prayers tonight. Okay?
No, you're not.
Prayers of forgiveness.
No, you're not. I ain't going to pray for him. All right, let's go back to the story. The Pharaoh had nothing to do with the corn or the animals. And if we looked at the level of understanding, Gentiles themselves are responsible for the earth. We're the ones who want to climate control and all of the other things that go with it. We're earthly people. Jews, on the other hand, are not earthly people. They're spiritual people. We Gentiles who begin to follow the Jewish understanding begin to move from this earthly sect that just works. But you look at the Jew and notice what happened. In that Jewish story, they were out binding sheaves. They were working. Not only were they working, but there was a product at the end. And the product at the end began to bow to them. Now, the second set of prayers or bowings came from the heavenly places. Do you remember the one word I told you that was misspelled? Shalom. Shalom was missing the Vav, a tall letter that goes from the earth, where the sheaves are, to the stars, the spiritual world. The Jewish people are responsible for connecting us between heaven and earth. That's their responsibility. Our responsibility is to do what we can here, learn what we can here, share what we can here, but know that what's going on is us here in this physical world, working our way towards the spiritual world. The Jew, on the other hand, has already established a relationship with God, supposedly, and that relationship has taken him to elevated heights. Joseph was telling his family, all of us, we all have a heavenly place. That was the difference between the two sets of dreams. In the case of this Pharaoh had the dreams. Pharaoh didn't understand what the dreams were about, but when it was all said and done, what do we know happened? Pharaoh stumbled. Who came to his aid? Joseph. What did he do? He interpreted the dreams. Now, notice that in these dreams that are going on, notice that there were 7 years of corn, 7, 7, 7. We know that's simple. That's 7 years. But back in those days, that didn't necessarily mean that. But he began to attach time to meditation, to understandings. Something that we oftentimes, when we go through dreams, our dreams are very much different than they were then. Our dreams are based upon what we had experienced during the day or over the last few days. And our mind goes through the process of sorting and selecting those things that we keep and those things that we get rid of. And oftentimes those things that we get rid of become our dreams. And some of them are pretty crazy. And it's a good reason we want to cut them out, get rid of them. But there's sometimes we get insights. There was times when as a principal, I used to have a pen and paper by my bedside that I would write on, because all of a sudden in the middle of the night, I'd be struck by something that I had learned. And all of a sudden I wrote it down to remember it for the next day. Because you and I both know when we dream dreams, very seldom do you keep a dream in your head. I remember I had a dream and boy, it was weird, but I can't remember what it was. That's why I oftentimes wrote it down. But as we're going through the process of learning, as we're going through this process of growing, we have to understand that there is a fundamental difference between Jews and Gentiles. The Jews have a relationship with God that we are trying to join into, if you will. We are grafted in. By grafted, I mean, we go back to Genesis chapter 12, verse 1-3, where you and I are those people who find themselves blessed by blessing Israel and continue our lives. But we also understand, as in doing that from Abraham, that there's only one true God. And that's the God that we should be serving. And that's what you and I are about, serving the one true God as we go through. I want to tell you a story. There was a story about a little boy, and he had a disagreement. And the disagreement was such that he took it to his dad. The only problem is his dad happened to be an exalted rabbi. And he says, I have a problem, Dad. I want you to solve this problem. Why are Jews and Gentiles different? And the rabbi is Maharsh. Anyway, the father looked at the little boy and he walked outside the house, and he saw outside the house there was one of his employees who was a Gentile. And he walked over to him and he said to him, have you eaten lunch today? Yes, I have. And he says, why did you eat? Well, I ate to live. To live? Yeah. Then he walked over to another worker outside who was a Jew who drove his wagons. He said, did you eat today? And he said, well, actually, no, I haven't eaten today. Well, why do you eat? Do you eat to live? No, I eat to serve God. From the little story, you begin to understand the fact that we view things differently. If I would ask my wife, we go out to eat quite often. She says, well, where do you want to eat? And I said, I don't care. She says, well, why don't you care? Because I eat to live. I don't live to eat. That phrase is now stuck in my head, and I now have to reconsider why I do what I do. Because you see, I want to do what God would want me to do. And I want to do it in the way God would want me to do it. So I have to refocus myself and re-examine different ways of looking at things. We need to find a way, well, a formula for greatness, I guess, is what I'm thinking of. Each person needs to recognize when he is temporarily in an Israel or in an Egypt, in a Mitzrayim, in a concentration. Because there are times when you and I get stuck. You know what I mean? Where we just get by. We could do more. We could learn more. But getting through that whole thing, we get seduced by our environment is one of the things that I thought of as I was coming to the end of my story. We're in an alien environment. God created this environment for us to grow through. And in growing through it, one has to understand, how often does one need to grow? The answer should be, you need to grow every minute of every day. You can't waste a day. But you and I both know we do waste days. We waste hours and we waste minutes and we do all those things. But when we find ourselves actively involved in doing the right things, we find that there's a great fulfillment that we didn't see before. Now, the dreams that Joseph had, the dreams that the Pharaoh had, both of them were simple dreams. But the point of emphasis was different in both of them. And what I want to get across is the idea that when we do start looking at the scriptures, find for ourselves a different path. Find a book, find a commentary, find somebody on television or radio or whatever. Find somebody who can give you a new insight. Constantly seek to grow, to change. I've talked long enough. I've talked for 45 minutes, so I guess it's time to say adios, or does anybody have any thoughts that they'd like to share?